Okay, so in this lesson, we're going to be now moving on to formalizing arguments. So far, we've had a look at the components of arguments, so the premises and the conclusions. We've had a look at how arguments are structured, so we've had a look at how premises support a conclusion. We've also had a look at the different criteria for evaluating arguments, so that would be the acceptability of the premises, the relevance of the premises, and the sufficiency of them. Now, we will be revisiting those three criteria later on when we have a look at fallacies in our reasoning. However, for now, we're going to be moving on to what we call standard form. Now, what standard form basically is when you take what's called an ordinary language argument, and you'll see that. Ordinary language arguments are what you've been engaging with basically since you've started the course. Where you look at the words, you see there's premises there that support a conclusion, and they're structured in a way that you would just read it off a piece of paper. And in a way, it's basically how you would say it as well if you were speaking it. Formalizing arguments initially will take just a little bit of practice to get used to it. And then it should become quite easy. Those of you in National 5, you are only expected to present arguments in standard form. Those of you in higher, you're going to have to present in standard form and represent arguments in what we call argument diagrams. So when it comes to the argument diagramming, those of you in National 5, you'll be given more standard form practice to do, while the higher pupils work on the argument diagramming lessons because they're quite complicated, and I'd rather the higher pupils just focused on it rather than giving National 5 extra information that could confuse things. So in this lesson, you're going to learn about the techniques used to present arguments in standard form. Your success criteria is to present arguments in standard form and to convert ordinary language arguments into standard form. So let's have a look at this lesson. So what is standard form? The standard form of an argument is a way of presenting the argument which makes clear which statements are premises, how many premises there are, and what premise is the conclusion. In standard form, each premise takes a new line and the conclusion is listed last. The premises and conclusion are separated by a line called the inference bar. So if in the exam, this is both National 5 and higher, you're asked to present an argument in standard form, it is essential that you put what we call the inference bar into your standard form presentation, because without it, it's a symbol that shows that these premises lead to the conclusion. If you don't have that, then that bar actually loses you a mark if you don't have it. It's a bit like in maths if you don't include some symbols in your exams. I'll show you an example. So, in standard form, an argument takes this form here. P1 is the first premise, P2 is the second premise, P3 is the third premise, and this can go on and on and on depending how many premises are actually in the argument. You then have your inference bar here, which you must include. You must have that inference bar, and then C, conclusion. So for example, over here, there's a nice gif of a cat in a bowl. Premise 1, so P1, all cats have tails. P2, Francis has a tail. Inference bar, so therefore, or so, or consequently, conclusion, Francis is a cat. So that is basically how you structure an argument when you're presenting it in standard form. So when you formalize an argument, you should make sure to tidy up the argument so that each statement makes sense as a standalone statement. So basically what you might do is you might see a sentence that has got a lot of words in it. It's still a statement, but you could do with tidying it up a bit. You could just maybe cut out some words so it just gets to the point. This means getting rid of any sentences that don't contribute to the argument, such as commands or questions. So, obviously, thinking back to what you've already done, you do not have commands, questions, exclamations in an argument because they are not statements. They don't have a truth value. They don't contribute to the argument. You should also include statements that have been implied rather than stated. Now, this is something that's quite interesting because questions do not belong in an argument. However, rhetorical questions, which are questions which it's sort of assumed you already know the answer to, can be reworded as sentences. I'll show you in the next example how this might work. Okay, but questions like "What day is it?" that they don't belong in an argument. However, a rhetorical question, which is sort of used to kind of get an answer out of you to support what they're saying, that can be used in an argument. So here's an example. If hires were difficult, wouldn't lots of pupils fail them? The pass rates are very high, so hires can't be that difficult. It's not like it was in my day. Okay, so this question here, if hires were difficult, wouldn't lots of pupils fail them, is a rhetorical question. Because what it's doing is it's saying, well, if they were difficult, wouldn't lots of people fail them? What it's doing is it's providing support to the conclusion here, which is indicated by the word so. So if you can reword it and say, if hires were difficult, lots of pupils would fail them. So that would be your first premise. What you need to do first of all is to put brackets around each of the statements. So like this. Put brackets around them and number them 1, 2, and 3. And you can do it in the order in which they appear, which just makes things much easier. So if hires were difficult, wouldn't lots of pupils fail them? So you put brackets around that and you number it number 1. The pass rates are very high, bracket it number 2. So hires can't be that difficult, bracket number 3. So here we go. Let's split this up. So if hires were difficult, lots of people would fail them. This was written as a rhetorical question. Higher pass rates are very high. Hires can't be that difficult. It's not like it was in my day. These are the sentences which appear in this argument. What you need to do is identify the conclusion. If you go back, the word so indicates a conclusion. Remember, going back to your inference indicators, the word so indicates a conclusion. So we've identified the conclusion. Next up, get rid of any sentences which don't contribute to the argument. So let's have a look. We've got a statement with a truth value. We've got a statement with a truth value. We've got the conclusion. We've got an exclamation. So let's get rid of that. That doesn't belong in the argument. So what you've done now is you've tidied things up a little bit. And this is how it would look in standard form. P1, if hires were difficult, lots of people would fail them. P2, higher pass rates are very high. Inference bar, therefore, conclusion, hires can't be that difficult. And that is how you present an argument in standard form. So you just need to be aware that there's kind of that one trick, which is with rhetorical questions. So rhetorical questions don't belong in an argument. However, if they are rhetorical, you can reword them as a statement. Okay, so again, questions like, what day is it, do not belong. You can't really turn that into a statement. However, a rhetorical question which is trying to lead you to an answer is totally fine, so long as you reword it as a statement. Right. Obviously, you're not in pairs just now. So what I want you to do is, I want you to have a look at these two arguments. And what I want you to do is I want you to reword these in standard form. So what I want you to do is I want you to, on a Word document, copy and paste these arguments and then show me you're working out. So how do you get from this to something that looks like this? Okay, so I'd like you to put it onto a Word document and then submit as your evidence for your work this lesson, which is just putting these arguments into standard form. So you need to identify the conclusions, you need to identify the premises, any sentences which don't belong, take them out. The answers are going to be on the next few slides, so if you pause the video and give it a shot, that would be great. Submit your attempt at it. So here are the answers. So first one is with Batman. He has no actual powers, he is always in a bad mood, and his voice is so deep you can barely understand him. That's why Batman is the worst superhero. So you can identify the conclusion because these three sentences here are trying to prove, well, these two sentences here, which contain three premises, are trying to support this statement here. That's why Batman is the worst superhero. So what you've got here is the reasons to believe why Batman is the worst superhero. So what you would do is you would put this into standard form. P1, he has no actual powers. P2, he is always in a bad mood. Premise 3, his voice is so deep you can barely understand him. So what you can do is if you've got two reasons in a sentence to believe something, they both count as individual premises. Inference bar, therefore, Batman is the worst superhero. So this is kind of typical of what you've been asked to do in the exam, which is where you'll be given an ordinary language argument and you'll be asked to convert it into standard form. And your answer to the next one, Tom Baker was the best Doctor Who. He played the character perfectly. His character made me laugh. The other doctors weren't as good as him. What you've got here is you've got premise 1, he played the character perfectly. Premise 2, his character made me laugh. Premise 3, the other doctors weren't as good as him. Conclusion, Tom Baker was the best Doctor Who. Again, remember your inference bar because that has to be there to symbolise that word, therefore, consequently, so, etc. Right, what you're going to do now is you're going to read pages 19 to 20 and complete task 9. Now, some of the questions in task 9 ask you to identify what are called hidden premises. You don't have to do that in higher philosophy anymore, so just ignore any arguments which ask you to find a hidden premise. What you could do is reword it in standard form and not include the hidden premises. There's no point in me teaching you about it because it will not appear in the exam. If you have any questions, please let me know and I'll be more than happy to help. So this is your first lesson on formalizing arguments. I will give you more practice at this, but this is just your introduction to it. Okay, so let me know if you need any support.